Our first reading today is from Ephesians chapter 3, verses 14 to 21. For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth takes its name. I pray that according to the riches of his glory, he may grant that you may be strengthened in your inner being with power through his Spirit, and that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, as you are being rooted and grounded in love. I pray that you may have the power to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, so that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. Now to him who by the power at work within us is able to accomplish abundantly far more than all we can ask or imagine, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus to all generations, forever and ever. Amen. And our reading from John, chapter 6, verses 1 to 21. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get even a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has five barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come unto the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going.
Someone provided the food, those loaves and fishes, to a young lad who was there that day. 5,000 people plus fed, the story goes. A boy there, not unlike this boy. Not unlike this boy today, a young Darcy with his fish in the boat on the River Murray. He's 7 years old and he's showing us his fish. He's very happy to share this photo fish today, and his parents are happy too. His story is related to mine, my great nephew on the River Murray, where I too grew up. Who was there that day by the Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Tiberias. Yes, a boy, and a huge crowd, and Jesus and his disciples. And here is a painting. Jesus multiplies the loaves and fishes. It's from Cameroon in Central Africa. Jesus Mafa is the artist. We see among the hills and near the water, Jesus, distinct in red cloak, the disciples in white, moving about, distributing food in baskets, and the people, women, men and children in multicolours in the foreground, and crowds going back into the distance. It's a scene and a story for Cameroon people, and it's a scene and a story, verbal and visual, for us to continue to engage today in the Jesus story. And we saw that enacted this morning with Jan and the children and the chocolate. This story of the feeding of the 5,000 is the only miracle story that's shared by all four Gospels, I understand. For many, the miracles of this story comes when people in the huge crowd see the boy's food and Jesus giving thanks, and they bring out and share their own food. That seems miraculous in itself, inspired, uninhibited and generous sharing. Likened perhaps to the recent successful rescue of the Thai boys from the cave, a huge effort by many skilled and generous people willing to risk their lives, cooperating and determined, and the outcome for us, it seems, and to them I'm sure, a miracle. For others, the story of the feeding of the 5,000 is a miracle as such. In both Gospels, John and Mark, this story is linked to the Jesus walking on water miracle. Now, that was Tiberias, and I have been to Tiberias many decades ago, and I didn't walk on water, but I accidentally slipped on the steps and fell in. I could swim. Whatever is meant by the writing of these stories, John does not deny the miracles, but he goes further than the miracles. The rest of this chapter in John will expand the bread image, the symbolism, so that the wide meaning of this event is that Jesus offers the true bread. John consistently takes stories of Jesus and moulds them so that they make statements about who Jesus is and who Jesus is for us, using images of daily necessity like bread, water, life and light. Earlier used in Israel's sacred writings, John declares that our deepest needs are to be found in Jesus. Found in Jesus because for John, Jesus is intimately linked to God as God's unique Son, so much so represents God that divine attributes and qualities easily transfer to him. To relate to Jesus, says John, is to relate to God. The two are one. Who were these people flocking to find Jesus? This happened in the Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Tiberias. The city of Tiberias, we're told, had been built only 10 years earlier than the time when Jesus was feeding the crowds nearby. Tiberias, built by Herod Antipas. The policies of Antipas forced rural farmers to pay tribute on their produce to the powerful urban centres. Here, loans of high interest rates became one of the key tools for creating poverty and land loss. It happens in many places today. And here in our city, desperate people trying to live on the lowest of incomes, struggling to pay rent and power accounts and buy food and basic essentials. Some take loans offered online or on television with interest being up to 48%. I know that. These people are locked into spiralling poverty. Many of the people flocking to Jesus were in poverty, sick, hungry, maybe homeless, abandoned by mainstream, looking for healing, driven by need, living in a land occupied by a foreign power, looking to Jesus in hope. They wanted good, compassionate leadership, a national king, but found the Jesus way was different. They found a miraculous, life-giving sharing. They found a different power and one modelling a way to live that is life-giving. I invite you to take a few moments to reflect on where we have seen or experienced sharing of that which gives life, moments of hope. It's the bread of practical help, the bread of hope and love and compassion, the bread of respect and encouraging growth in faith. I said in the National Church just last week, our new president and the Uniting World and Southeast Asian church partners met, and they were sharing issues of health, education and economic development and theology, shared by them as an inspiring and empowering time. And I imagine a time of hope and practical policies for possibilities for life changes. I see God's life-giving sharing in life-giving feeding and healing in the work and the paintings of Australian psychologist Diane Hanna, working with Medicine Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, in war-torn Mosul, feeding and healing and malnourished little children in families fleeing the bombing. There's so many other things. There's a lot of darkness in the world, but there's a lot of hope too. We could do a whole series on this gospel reading rather than just a few minutes this morning, but I want to bring something of the Ephesians reading, Paul's prayer for the people in Ephesus in what is Western Turkey. This is again who Jesus is and God, and who they are, the church in Ephesus, in relationship through the love of God, the breadth and length and height and depth and the love of God. Don't lose heart, Paul wrote. May you be strengthened in your inner being and be empowered, have faith and be grounded in love, and know the love of Christ, which goes beyond knowledge. This prayer is for us too. Did you see the preacher and hear the message of the Reverend Michael Curry at the royal wedding of Harry and Meghan? He's the head of the Episcopalian Church, the Anglican Church in the US, and he preached with passion, and I have to say with glee, of the breadth and length and depth and height of God's love. There's power in love, he said, and don't over-sentimentalise it. And he said there's power in love to help and to heal, to lift us up, to liberate us, to show us the way to live. He spoke of love of God, love of neighbour, and while you're at it, love yourself. He spoke of Jesus, a movement grounded in the love of God for the world, power to change the world. And do you remember he spoke of fire as the first great discovery of human beings and of the power of fire? And he said he didn't walk on water over from the US to England, but through the power of fire in an engine. I actually talked with Colin Sampson about him wearing his mechanic's overalls to church today and starting up an engine in church. Just a little one, I said, maybe something like a lawnmower, to give the example of the fire, the spark that gets a motor going, the spark that gets the fire of love going. But he thought it not advisable to start a petrol engine in the confines of a building with a crowd of people. Michael Curry said the second greatest discovery would be for humanity to capture the fire of love, the redempting power of love. And the sparks within us are part of that. In a few moments after the offering, we will sing together the new song we practice, God Be In, Around, Above Me, from the New Zealand new book, Hope Is Our Song. And the final lines to sing are these: work for justice, peace and freedom, spread the feast so all may come, till the world becomes God's kingdom and God's will is truly done.